Well, here we are, another week whizzed by, and once again I'm wandering aloud in my gallery. Um, and of course, my wanderings were provoked by another letter from my dear friend Oliver Burkman. Of course, I haven't actually met Oliver, but he writes in such a conversational sort of way. It's like he's an old friend. And this week, he once again took a contrarian position to make I think, a very good point. He asks us to think in a situation where everything seems slightly grim. He asks us to think about the following. Perhaps the situation isn't bad. It's actually much, much, much worse than you think. It doesn't seem like a good way to help yourself, but bear with me. His argument, I think, holds up. What he suggests is that in these situations, and they might be enormous ones, like climate change related disasters that are unfolding somewhere near you, or they might be mundane, banal, everyday sort of dilemmas like, my God, my to-do list has run completely amok. How am I going to go about replying to the 1,000 emails I've received? And he suggests that we need to bear in mind, consider, that it could be much, much worse, that we don't have a deluge of emails in our inbox. We actually have an infinite, never-ending stream. Whatever you do, there's just going to be more. A bit like and perhaps this is a generational thing, but the Disney Sorcerer's Apprentice with the buckets of water that are filling up and flooding the magician's studio. Yes, my inbox felt like that while I was working. And in fact, news about problems on the horizon can feel a little bit like that too. So he asked to consider that actually it's much worse. The problem is not a hard one to solve. It's an impossible problem to solve. And that's actually the comfort. Because once you've realized that the problem is essentially unsolvable, far from being a sort of moment of darkness, desperation, sort of a starting point for a nihilistic downward spiral, actually that's the moment when you can free yourself. Free yourself from trying to solve the impossible problem and start concentrating on the real hard problem that confronts you, which is actually solvable. So you face problems like we do. Let's talk about climate change. Face problems with the possibility that we might be confronted where I live in the coming years with disastrous floods or epic droughts. Well, I can't solve that problem. That's that one's spinning out and well beyond my control. What will be, will be. What I can do, for example, is plant trees. I can solve the difficult problem of making my land better at conserving water and absorbing water, and planting trees is the way to do that. The mundane problem of to-do lists that are out of control, well, it is always going to be out of control. But what are the one or two pressing things that I need to do today? Who do I actually really need to write to, and let me write to that one person. That's hard, because it is. If it was easy, I would have done it. So by definition, it's a hard thing to do, but let me do that hard thing. It's not impossible. And when I was reflecting on Oliver's insights, it kind of reminded me of the strategy I used to take with my extra tuition maths students when I started on my journey of teaching mathematics in 1990, Port Elizabeth, South Africa. And the students that I'd get were ones who were in desperate trouble. And I'd begin with asking them to consider, well, let's put our cards on the table. You're worried about failing the year, about having to repeat the whole year because you failed your final mathematics exam. I said, yes, it's terrible. I said, okay, well, is it? Let's confront that problem. Now, I know this isn't exactly what Oliver's saying, but it's I think, a similar kind of twisted logic. And I'd ask my students to consider, well, just imagine for a moment, before we start looking at mathematics, that you fail your final math exam and you are forced to repeat the whole year, or to, at the very least, repeat that maths exam. Well, what would happen? I said, it's terrible. I said, yeah, but what would happen? Would you be thrown out on the street? And they'd say no. You know, our parents would be livid, angry that we are wasting our education. Okay, I said, well, that's a problem that you need to confront. Tears are in order, perhaps, at that point. You know, a deep apology and a commitment to turn things around and do a little bit better. Show them that you are serious about that. And actually, what will they do beyond that? They will still love you. And of course, if they'd said at that point, well, I'm going to face up to dreadful physical abuse and my parents hate me. Well, no one ever said that to me, but I suppose I would have had to confront that, and I'm not sure what I would have said, but at least then I'd have known what the real underlying problem behind perhaps their maths learning was, and I would have had to work out how I was going to confront that. But in this case, the students very quickly would confess that actually nothing would happen. You know, life would go on, differently but the same. And we'd then say, well, okay, now that we've realized that the thing that you claim to be really, really afraid about is not actually the end of the world. It's a serious thing. Let's confront a real problem. You don't know how to solve simple linear equations. Let's try and solve that problem. Forget about the big thing that is frightening you, and let's focus on the little thing that perhaps we can deal with. And I remember one student in particular, and I took this tack with her, Sarit Levine, lovely girl, very good tennis player, not a very good maths student. But actually, after a year and a half's tuition, she did rather well. Admittedly, in the South African matriculation standard rather than higher grade maths exam, it wasn't the hardest maths exam in the world. But, you know, she could deal with quadratic equations and trigonometry and all that sort of good stuff. And she could deal with it well, and she was confident about it. But it started by confronting the really big problem, realizing that actually her parents would love her come what may. She would carry on playing tennis and enjoying life because she was a happy person, and she was. And she could start focusing on what immediate problem she could solve with her difficulties in the wonderful world of mathematics. And I think we can do a little bit of that, all of us, whatever's troubling us. Take the impossible problem, acknowledge it, realize it's impossible, and find a difficult problem that is doable, that is solvable, and confront that. So those are some thoughts in the gallery. Perhaps I will progress to the garden tomorrow. Who knows? Till then, happy problem solving, and I trust you're well and your lives are filled with joy. And that's it from a slightly overcast Brazil and a gallery in the northeast. Ciao.